Okay, so enjoy.
So what I have on the screen right now is we do so many different things that I don't have time in my presentation, so I'll throw something up while people are coming in. So if you watch this, we're using electricity to kill weeds. This is a neighbor's organic millet field that he had Palmer amaranth problems in. It's about 15,000 volts. And so anything that touches that lead bar is dead, for lack of any other better term. And we've done some Palmer amaranth out of beets and stuff like that. So just when I'm going to talk about it later, but I didn't have time to put the presentation, put the video in the presentation. So I thought I'd throw it up there, just so that way you guys know what I'm talking about when we get that far. So. So yeah, I hope everybody can hear me okay. If I can use the mic, but I would rather not because I get this all set up. So I'm Roy Pfaltzgraff, and we're going to talk about arid farming in Colorado. This last year was dry, if you hadn't noticed. This next spring, it's going to be dry, if you haven't seen the forecast. So really, it's kind of things that we're doing and how we're starting to question everything that we've ever been taught. And this is our cornfield this year. If you're wondering, it didn't make. So where this started, my parents came back to the farm. We farmed south of Haxton, which is up in the northeast corner, east of Sterling, about 30 miles. 2,000 acres of dry land. This last year we had 4.5 inches of rain during the growing season, and that included 1.5 inches of rain at the end of September. So we were very dry. We did harvest crops. We had neighbors that didn't even pull the combine out of the shed. So I want to kind of give you an idea of where we started and then where we're at now, so you can kind of see where you're at in comparison to what we did. This is a picture of the farm 5 years ago. Well, it was actually 2016 when I came back. And my father was, wheat, row crop, summer fallow. He was chem fallow. We had been 100% no-till since '99. And before that, of course, it was regular tillage fallow. And we actually had one field that we didn't realize until we started doing some analysis on stuff that was wheat fallow from the beginning of time. So it had never seen anything other than wheat. The reason is the topography of the field is horrible. It follows a creek bottom, and so you got a gravel bottom, and within a 1/4 mile we have 100 feet of elevation change to a caliche rock hills. And so it's all terraced, and the terraces actually run into each other, so when you're out there harvesting it, it's a disaster. So that's why we never did anything else. And then when we started changing things and we realized what was going on, it's like, well, this is our opportunity to really go after a field. So that was the wheat fallow. My dad started raising sunflowers in 1975, listed them in, which it's been a while probably since you've ever heard about a lister, if you even know what a lister is. Started no-till planting in '84. We applied our first glyphosate in '85. The reason we know that is we have computer records that go back that far. We can look at individual transactions that far back. So we have this huge reservoir of data that we're just starting to learn how to mine. Dad started soil testing in '84. I have every single soil test result from 1984 to present. The problem is in 1984, it was, they didn't give the field name. They said, the field next to the wheat stubble. Thankfully, we have the computerized records. We could go back and be like, okay, what field was in wheat field that year? So there's some challenges there, some growing pains. We went 100% no-till in 99. We got our air seeder in 99. It was a hoe drill, a Bourgault. Love Bourgault. You probably never heard of it. It's a Canadian brand, built hell for stout. And the one we get, the hoe drill, you know, when you go no-till, that ground turns hard for the first 4 years or 3 years as that mycorrhiza gets rebuilt. And all the neighbors complained about it because they were going no-till about the same time and we never noticed it. Well, that's what happens when you're seeding with a chisel with carbide points on it. So it was a great thing to go no-till with because we could ignore some of that stuff. We actually helped a company develop their auto steer equipment in 2005. So we've been, you know, progressing along that, you know, looking at technology has always been really important. And Dad wanted a stripper header for years. We finally got 2016, got one. So fast forward to today, this is the farm today. If you notice, it looks a little different. First thing you'll notice is there's a bunch of equipment sitting there that wasn't there before. When I came back, I told my dad, first of all, things have to change. And number two, we need new equipment. And it wasn't because what we had would have been inadequate for what I wanted to do. It was the newest piece of equipment was the air seeder from 99. We had a tractor from 95, the combine was an 87. It's like this stuff's wore out. So we actually recapitalized the farm in a single year. We had a $500,000 of capital investments in a single year. And our accountant looked at that and he's like, farms don't do this. He goes, businesses do this, but farms don't do this. So it was a big chunk to swallow. The kicker is just to give you an idea of how things are going. All of that equipment will be paid off because we have the final payments on the combine and the tractor on April of this next year. It'll be 100% paid off. So people always ask me, is soil health profitable? The answer is absolutely. We've actually tripled our gross revenue and doubled our expenses. So we actually took our gross revenue and turned it into our net revenue. And this year, with the complete total disaster it was, we broke even. And there's not many operations that can say that on this year. So I've gone to continuous cropping. People say we don't have enough water. Well, that's what they say. I've gone to crop diversity. This last year we had 14 different crops. So we went to continuous cropping in 2017. I started developing what I call my diversity index on fields. So I look at fields and what different crops have they had in their history. And the reason that happened is when we started doing Haney tests and get our soil health scores, we had fields that were side by side that would have like a three-point different score. And it's like, well, why does this field have a better score than this field? And same weather, essentially, same soils. The only thing different is the rotations. So with our computerized records, we actually set up a chart that goes back to 2000 that has every field and every crop that was in those fields from then until now. And with that, we started drawing connections on what crops make a big difference. We did soil health testing in 2017. We have since gone to Regen Labs and gotten their Haney test. That's where doctors Haney work because both Liz and Rick are there. Lance, I really like working with him. You can go to whatever lab you want. I think they do a really good job, and we've actually did some double sampling and sent it to a different lab, and the other labs aren't crediting nitrogen like they should. And the least amount was 10 pounds difference. The most amount was 40 pounds. So Dr. Haney made the test, it's named after him. He's there and he's the one driving, what their testing is. So huge respect for them. We've worked with other labs. There's other great labs out there. It's just Right now, I think that regen is kind of on the top of the pile. We started playing around with narrow row spacing in 2017. We started doing gluten-free production in 2018, which means we have the John Deere combine that's sitting there, that's in 1987, was dedicated to gluten-free because of some marketing stuff that we have. Of course, that being said, we have no wheat on the farm this year. For being wheat farmers, it's kind of weird. In the history of the farm, this is the first year there's never been wheat. But financially, it makes sense. Soil health, it makes sense. So, and with the gluten-free, it just makes the life a lot easier. Clean out equipment. Added beekeeping in 2018. Started doing direct sales to the public in 2018. Started playing with perennial cover crops in 2019. Added a grain cleaner in 2019. We now have 6 grain cleaners. I got a video of my favorite one on it. Like I said, 14 different crops this year. We've been as high as 18 different crops. This next year we're going to be down to about 10 because we cut a couple of things because of what's going on with the weather. The electroweeder was just this last year, and we actually raised dryland rice, some 10 heirloom varieties this last year in my garden because you guys want to complain about seed costs. It is $5 for 7 grams of this seed. And 7 grams, if you don't know, isn't very much. It was interesting results, and there's significant upside, and someday you will be raising rice, is pretty much what it's going to come down to. So one of the things I like to throw out there, because we are so vastly different. Our crop insurance agent came in this spring to get some papers signed, and he said, I want you to know that your neighbors are laughing at you. And it's like, well, yeah, so. And we do whole farm revenue insurance because of all the specialty crops that we do. And whole farm revenue, our crop insurance agent actually gets to see the Schedule F in the tax return. So he knows what's going on financially. He said, well, they came in and they sat in my office and made fun of what you guys are doing for a while. And he goes, it was so hard for me not to say something. He goes, because if they knew what was going on, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. They'd be trying to figure out what's going on, and I don't have any secrets. So I'll share anything with you guys. But to challenge the status quo takes commitment, courage, imagination, and above all, dedication to learning. So if you want to change, if you want to go against what the most common thing is, this is what it's going to take. And part of it is just learning how to ignore some of the noise out there that's telling you you're nuts. Yeah, I'm nuts, but you know what? We went and we changed banks this year because our bank that we were at wasn't progressive enough. And the bank that we went to, they looked at everything and they're like, okay, well, you know, we don't see any problems. And you know, they recognize the difference in that change in mindset. The other thing is you need to challenge your own status quo before someone else does. Because you need to challenge what your thinking is every single decision you make. Because every decision you make has a repercussion, and if you're just doing something because that's the way it's always been done, that's the first thing you need to look at and go, well, why has that always been done? Because what you're gonna see that we're doing goes against everything that you've ever been taught, whatever you've heard. I'm gonna disagree with Jay on some stuff here in a little bit. And really the best thing I ever did was not get a degree in agronomy. I have a degree in math and computer science from the Colorado School of Mines. Has nothing to do with farming. It did teach me system thinking, and that's the most important thing, is we actually think about our farm as a system and not as a checklist. Because it's really easy to farm a checklist. It was wheat, now it's going to be corn, and then it's going to be fallow. With system thinking, you have to analyze all the different data and make these decisions and then go with it. Now, the other thing that I've added because I got to know Jay Fuhrer, But his big thing was talking about mental health. And that's something that we have to address, especially if we're going to start changing what we're doing. Because personally, I fight this where I go out, I'll put a crop in, you know, we've cut our fertilizer rates significantly, we've cut our herbicide rates, we're doing all these things, and we go out and we harvest a crop, and it's like, I put 10 pounds of nitrogen on that corn and I made 50 bushel because we got 7 inches of rain. Boy, what would have happened if I'd have put 40 pounds of nitrogen out there? What if? What if? And it's hard because we have been taught that we need to dump on the inputs to make a good crop. When you go the other direction, then you're like, well, could I have been better off? Well, I might have raised more, but I guarantee you my profit wouldn't have been as high. And really, I might have actually raised less if I had to put that much out in the ground and we didn't get any rain. You know, those salts are hard on things. The other personal thing that we never really touch on is if I have a job with, you know, some company and they go out of business, they went out of business. If I'm farming and the farm goes bankrupt, not only have I lost everything I've worked on, but I've lost everything that my family has worked on for generations. And I don't think we recognize that sometimes, and that is why there is so much weight hanging over our heads, is, you know, if something happens, it's on me. And so that's a pretty significant one. When we started raising other crops, I had a severe question of, is there really other markets? And that's what I hear when I talk to other farmers, is like, well, there's no markets out there. There's no markets out there. There are tons of markets out there. And every time I turn around, I run into another one. But it's just that, you know, making these steps are really difficult. And of course, then you have your family. That I went to my parents, I said, we're gonna go to continuous cropping. And my mom says, I've lived on this farm since 1950. It won't work. She said, you know, this last year, buckwheat is our highest profitability crop. And it was a complete failure. We didn't even give buckwheat honey for the bees. And I was really beating myself up over it. And my 80-year-old mother goes, well, we just raised a cover crop. And it's like, talk about a change in mindset from somebody saying it won't work to be continuous cropping to, it's okay, we lost a crop, it's not that big a deal. So you can change their minds too, but it's tough because they are set into that mindset for so long. It's too dry. I have determined, thanks to this last year, that we need 6 inches of rain to produce an average crop. And people think I'm crazy. It's because we waste so much water.
That's right. And
you gotta change your thinking. And it goes against what you hear. It goes against what the experts say. It goes against what we just heard from Jay. And then my parents are like, well, there's no markets. And my dad had the rule when I took over the farm, because he fought with his father-in-law for 40 years trying to change things on the farm. My dad had the rule of, you can raise whatever you want as long as you have a market before it goes in the ground. And initially, you could tell that he struggled with that. I knew things had changed when I came home from a conference, and he goes, okay, what crazy idea we're gonna try now? I said, we're gonna try upland rice. And he said, okay, where's your market? That was it. I was just like, ruined all my fun. So, you know, when we look at these challenges, it makes me think of, you know, you got a guy here that's stuck in the mud, and he obviously has trips on because he knows that he has muddy situations, so he goes bigger instead trying to solve his problem instead of maybe driving around the problem. And of course, you see the tractor they're trying to pull him out with is equally sized. I'm just really happy I don't have prairie potholes. So, what are we going to question? Continuous cropping. What crops are even possible? What markets are out there? What we're going to do with row spacing? This is where things start getting weird. Plant populations, seed treatments. And then I actually have a miscellaneous etc. because I got so many different things going on and throw stuff up there. That's buckwheat. You've never seen it raised. That was the first year we ever raised buckwheat. I love buckwheat. It does great things for the soil. And there's a huge market for buckwheat. If you want to raise buckwheat, you call Mindac up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and they will send you a contract. And part of their contract is because their delivery point is North Dakota, they find out how far away you are from the delivery point and they pay you a premium to offset that cost. Because they are looking for growers so much. And because of me, they found out that when you stress buckwheat, it produces high protein. And average buckwheat is 14 or 12% protein, and we were delivering 18% protein. There was a reason they called me back and raised the offer and asked when we wanted their trucks to show up. So we didn't even have to deal with freight. And that was all hauled and it went to Japan for soap noodles. So, it's when you start getting into some of these stuff, you have opportunities that you just don't ever imagine being there. So, continuous cropping. The traditional view is Colorado doesn't receive enough rain and farmers have to fallow. What broke me of this is there was some research by University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension out of Grant, Nebraska. I have the paper. There's the Stumpf International Wheat Research Farm in Grant. You can go to their website and dig through stuff, and it's under the wheat research, actually. But they did a study, and they did continuous crop versus fallow, and they found that at most you retain is 2 inches. At most, you retain is 2 inches. The rest is either evaporated or percolated. If you don't have a cut canopy on that, if you don't have a living root on that, that water goes bye-bye. So why don't you at least put a crop out there and get something out of that water, reduce your weed impact, increase your profitability, or just let it go. Now, pan evaporation rate for Northeast Colorado on average is 72 inches a year. This is where I was a good boy and I didn't ask Jay what his pan evaporation rate is. Pan evaporation rate up there is about 36 to 40 inches. So 1 inch of rain up there is 2 inches of rain down here. There's research by the USDA ARS that they compared Bismarck, North Dakota to Akron, Colorado, and it takes 70% more rainfall to make the same ton of plant matter in Akron than it does up there. So when people talk about, oh, we're doing this on 16 inches of rain, the right question is, what is your pan evaporation rate? And I've actually seen speakers fall apart when you ask that question. Because it's a lot easier to do things where the water doesn't evaporate all year long, no matter what's going on. The other thing they talked about in that article is the average carrying cost for chem fallow is about $100 per acre per year. And so you have expense but no income. You have overhead but no income. So that cost is automatically attached to the following wheat crop. That following wheat crop, it better do at least 20 bushel to the acre to cover all these extra costs. Where you might take a little bit less wheat crop, but you had a profitable crop the year before, so you're better off. So financially, you come out ahead. So the video that's running here, and it'll run while I talk, is of us cleaning buckwheat. Our buckwheat and millet, part of our oats, corn, go to a gluten-free malting company where they're malted and sent to about 80 breweries in the United States and in 8 other countries. There's a reason I wear a European Union pin. It's because my buckwheat and millet goes to Europe and it makes me good money. It also makes the malting company good money. We actually get together and have strategic planning at the end of every year for what's going to happen this next year because we are really vested with each other. This is my seed cleaner. It's a 1969 Clipper 240 8 BDH, paid less than $5,000 for it. Bought it from a bean company. They replaced it with $2 million worth of equipment. I talked to the guy that ran the plant afterwards. He said, I want that seed cleaner back. It does a great job, and it's the coolest piece of equipment that I run. And I kill weeds with 15,000 volts. So that says something. Traditional view is there's no markets other than the local elevator. Your relationship ends with your crop when you open that trap. The biggest mindset you need to change is everything you raise is food. It might not be people food, it might be animal food, but everything you raise is food. And when you start seeing it that way, it starts changing how you treat things, because you start thinking, well, would I want my family to eat this? And the farmers have to sell it at harvest. And this is one reason why we changed banks, because the bank couldn't understand that this malting company wants deliveries of buckwheat for a calendar year, and they want it sold right at harvest. And they struggled with that. Well, I guarantee you, when we started depositing checks for $30,000 every month, including January, February, March, that makes a huge change. There are markets everywhere. You have to know where to look. You have to realize the opportunities that are out there. And there is enough to go around. I have a friend that used to work for Ardent Mills. He said one day, he goes, Roy, I don't get farmers. And I'm like, what's not to get? We're actually a pretty simple group. And he goes, yeah, but they fight over the same piece of the pie and they live in the bakery. And it's like, Mike, you're absolutely right. Because we think we have to raise wheat, corn, whatever. Well, no, we can raise all kinds of things, but we have to change our mindset. And there's a lot of people that want to buy your products and your story. And that is the piece that we've been forgetting is every farm has a story, and that story is different and unique. And it's special. And the millennial generation, that is the most important thing when they buy their food. You have a package, they look at the back of the package and there's a story, they're more likely to buy your product. We have a line of gluten-free malting or gluten-free millet mixes that they don't even taste gluten-free. That's the best part. I developed the recipes, and that was kind of my rule is I'm not gonna sell anything that I wouldn't eat myself. We sell dry edible beans, $4 a pound. It's the exact same beans that we sell for $40 a hundred when we deliver it to the elevator. Does it take more work? Yeah. And I tell people if you're going to do direct marketing, you're going to earn every single penny of that. But you will make more money. And in that note, when we started doing this, my dad's like, okay, in 5 years, how many employees are we going to have? And I thought for a second, I said, we're going to have 5. And that was a couple years ago. And just the other night, we had my stepson and his fiance over to have a conversation with him about would he be interested in working at the farm. Because right now he's working at a feedlot 14 to 16 hours a day. He grew up in Chicago. He loves working at the feedlot, but he does it at the same time, he just doesn't like some of the stuff he sees. And it's like, well, hey, come drive tractor. We used to have a cow herd. Nothing says we can't get one again, or hogs. And he's like, I don't like hogs. And his fiance goes, I like hogs, I do hogs. She grew up, when I met her, I was like, okay, she's a little different, she's really quiet. Grew up in Western Washington State. Well, at dinner the other night, we're talking, she's like, oh yeah, I was really active in FFA. We raised rabbits and I did aquaponics. And it's like, okay, yeah, there's a place for you too. So.
You're 30 minutes in.
Yeah. And
then tell them about your brownie mix.
My brownie mix is excellent. I actually had one of the top chefs in Denver, he tried it. And I said, what do you think of my brownie mix? And he goes, it's pretty good. I said, Kelly, it's gluten-free. And he goes, it's the best gluten-free brownie I've ever had. It's recommended you have a little bit of milk with it or ice cream because it's pretty rich. Row spacing and population. Row spacing and population is restricted because we don't have moisture. So we have to have these 30-inch rows. Jay's talking about 60-inch rows and cover crops in between. And we have that issue because we don't get moisture. And farmers have to do row crops in 30-inch rows because we have a pan evaporation of 72 inches a year. We lose a lot of moisture. Yeah, but one reason we lose moisture is because we have bare ground. And as soon as we get that canopy, it creates that microclimate inside that canopy, and we start saving that moisture and processing it through a plant. So I started with drilling sunflowers with standard populations in the first year out. It's like, I had heads out there, oil sunflowers. The heads were like this, which tells me my population is way too low. And so that we drilled at 18, and then we were going to go to 22, and I screwed up setting the drill, and we put them at 40. And the agronomist is like, "What are you guys going to do?" And I'm like, "Good standing." He goes, "Best stand I've ever seen." So let them go. You know, we'll just see what happens. We raised 2,000-pound sunflowers on that field that had only ever had wheat. 2,000-pound dryland sunflowers on less than average rainfall. Those things were 7 foot tall. They love being packed in like that. So we drill milo, dry beans, corn. I'm actually going to take the old air seeder, I'm going to rework it down to 3-inch row spacing, because I really think if I push really tight row spacing on some of my cereal grains, it will actually help them because they'll be so dense that there'll essentially be no weeds because they just won't have any room to grow. Just choke it out. That way I don't have to use herbicide. Saves me money. So something to think about. If you have 6 30-inch rows and a half mile long, that's an acre. There are 3 miles of furrow in that 1 acre. If you drill that exact same thing on a 12-inch spacing in a half mile in 1 acre, you'll have 8 miles of furrow. So that's why we have to increase our population, because we're taking the same amount of seed and putting it in 2.5 times more furrows. So yeah, there's a reason I had sunflowers with heads like this. So currently we're dropping corn at 27.5. We usually plant it at between 12 and 13. We have sunflowers running 35, milo, we're at 50,000, dry beans 100,000. Those numbers, they're high. You're like, boy, you spend a lot in seed. We raise non-GMO corn. It's the cheapest stuff we can get, 150 bucks a bag. Sunflowers, that's the expensive one on seed. Milo, pretty cheap seed if you think about it. And dry beans, keep your own seed back. Then you don't have any seed costs. You just have the lost opportunity costs. But when we started drilling these things, you canopy at least 3 weeks faster. So the first year we did this, we had corn a half mile down the road from the neighbor. He planted it on the same day I drilled it. He did his standard fertilization rates. We had probably 80 pounds of carryover nitrogen because that's what all of our fields have every year. So we put another 20 pounds of nitrogen out there. We raised 50 bushel corn, and he raised 25 bushel corn. We cut it with our sunflower head, just straight pans. That's the most challenging thing. Because I've priced a corn head that'll do that narrow stuff. I didn't pay that much for my combine. Seed treatments. You have to remember the seed treatments were developed for less than favorable soil conditions. Back east, when it's time for the corn to go in the ground, it doesn't matter if it's wet or cold, it goes in the ground. How often do we actually have cold, wet ground that we're putting corn seed in? Not very often. Yeah, there's some insect issues, but do we really have that much of a problem? Or is there better ways to control it? Believe it or not, there's a company out there that makes products that are matched to specific species of cutworms, and they give these cutworms a virus, and these cutworms die from this virus, and it produces tons more virus. They puree them, and that's what you spray. And when you go spray, that is actually the lowest viral load on that field, because then the worms that are out there get that virus, they die, and put out more virus. So my question is, and we haven't played with it yet because we haven't had an issue yet, is how long does that effect last? How long will that virus overwinter? Because that could make a huge difference for some people. But farmers have to use seed treatments, and you have a hard time finding seed that's not treated. I went to our corn seed company. We work with Stein Seeds. They actually have seed corn that's developed for narrow rows. It's actually bred for narrow row spacing. And I sent an email to the company that says I'd like to have a phone call with Myron Stein. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Stein Seed. Harry Stein, he went to college with my parents. Myron went to college with my sister, so I kind of got a little bit in there. Harry Stein is the richest farmer in the world. Forbes magazine had him in this September, his value at $9 billion. 80% of the soybeans that are put into the ground in the world have his genetics, and he gets a cut on every single one of those. Nicest guy you ever met. Drives an old beat-up Ford pickup. I mean, of course, Myron has a four-wheel drive Lamborghini, so we're not going to talk about that. But I requested to talk to Myron, and I thought that'd go nowhere. And about 2 weeks later, my phone rang, and I look at it and it said, Adel, Iowa, and it's like, I don't know anybody in Adel, Iowa. Yeah, I do know somebody in Adel, Iowa. It was Myron Stein. So I told him I don't want treated seed. And he goes, why? And I said, we don't have these problems. And I think that seed treatment is affecting my microbial health in my soils. So I want to do a test plot to test this. And I said, but when I do test plots, I don't screw around. I'm one of those people that if I'm going to do something, I do it on the whole farm. But I said, I tell you what, I'm going to do 160 acres of corn and we're going to split it. I want 80 acres of untreated seed and 80 acres of treated seed. Okay, it did not help that it didn't rain on this field this year. But we learned a whole bunch. One of them is the untreated plants lived 3 weeks longer than the stuff that came from the treated seed. That tells us something right there. If you have a problem, then use a seed treatment for that problem, but don't go out there with the shotgun approach and we're going to put a seed treatment on that needs to control all these things when we only have one problem. And then is there other treatment options? So what we have here is a yield map from field peas. I like messing around with my agronomist. He really doesn't believe in what we're doing. He's a great guy. He tries to be supportive, but we're stretching him quite a bit, quite often. And so I go out and I do things and I don't put flags in the field. I mark it on my GPS and I don't tell him about it. So he comes to me about a month after these peas had come up. This was a couple years ago. And he's like, I swear there's a line in that field. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, you go out there, and he goes, and it's right with how you drilled it. He's like, what'd you do? Okay, well, because there's bias. If I told him there was something going on, he'd be like, oh yeah, I can see that. But when he doesn't know that there's something going on and he goes out there and he's like, oh yeah, there's something going on. People always say that you shouldn't apply any nitrogen when you do legumes. None at all. Well, Dr. Christine Jones, the more stuff I do, the more I respect her because her crazy ideas aren't actually as crazy as they initially sound. And she says you need a little bit of something to kick off biology. So we put down 10 pounds of nitrogen with all of our stuff. But I'm like, you know what, here's an opportunity. I want to try some other things. And so we're going to do multiple tests in here. So really we have 3 plots and you kind of see, and I cut this with the terrace. I didn't cut it as I drilled it. Personally, I think it's a little bit better because that forces, if there's something obvious, that forces it to show up because you're cutting across the sample instead of with the sample. So you kind of see there's a diagonal line right through here, and things are pretty good over there. Well, that is our traditional 25 pounds of 40 rock, which is a starter fertilizer similar to Mez. It's better than Mez because of zinc availability in it. And 20 pounds of urea. We've switched to AMS for a number of reasons. Part of it is we aren't using very much of it. AMS is more expensive, but you get a bunch of sulfur with it. This section is the seed treatment that I did over here, but no nitrogen. It's like, well, nitrogen obviously makes a difference, but what's the deal with this stuff over here? That's a half a pound of sugar per acre applied to the seed. Just make a simple syrup. We were putting inoculant on the peas, so I just dumped it in there with the inoculant and sprayed it on. Because I have a buddy, Russell Hendrick. You might have heard of him lately. He just set the new dryland yield record for corn at 459.5 bushels per acre. He's in North Carolina, if you're wondering. He's a good farmer. He's a first generation farmer, so he does know that he's doing things wrong, but it obviously is going pretty well. Well, he puts sugar in furrow. And it's like, why? So we had a discussion and had an opportunity. I was having the discussion with some of the guys from the CCTA. I'm on the board, by the way, if you're looking for another conference to go to. Burlington, 7th and 8th, I have brochures with me. The food alone is worth the cost of admission, so yeah. But I talked with Michael Thompson, and Michael Thompson goes, well, it's simple. And it's like, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, the biology in the soil sees that sugar as exudate, so it's like, oh, something's pumping a bunch of stuff into the ground, I need to start growing. I need to start reproducing to take advantage of all these exudates. Well, at the same time, the seed germinates and it puts out roots and it sees all this active soil, and it's like, I need more roots to take advantage of all the soil activity. So it kind of tricks both halves into it. Now, the really big thing to note is this is a gravel bottom. This is a pasture that it follows. These areas down here should look just like these areas here. We had 15 to 20 bushel difference in the poor areas of the field. And at $10 a bushel, is it worth 16 cents of sugar? Yeah. But it's one of those, what other seed treatment options are out there? Sugar's one. I actually did a test plot this year with my air seeder. It's a really sweet piece of equipment. I brag, I got the best air seeder in Northeast Colorado. I got 4 bins on it with 4 meters, so I can do variable rate on the go. I got 2 separate air streams, so I can put things in a mid-row band in addition to the furrow. It's a sweet piece of equipment, and it'll drill through anything. So I put a half pound of sugar in furrow on my pinto beans. Half pound of sugar, 5 pounds of sugar, and 10 pounds of sugar. And then I ran out of sugar. It's one of those things you really don't want to dump a bunch of sugar in your air cart if you're not very sure about it. And of course, we didn't harvest any beans, but they held on. Legumes are amazing. Through this whole drought, they just sat there. They didn't die. They just sat there. We got an 1.5 inches of rain at the end of September. They started blooming. If it hadn't have frozen until the 1st of November, I would have harvested beans this year. And so they're high on my list, especially, they fix nitrogen. Black-eyed peas do an amazing job fixing nitrogen. And if you want to talk about availability of markets, pull out the phone book and look up bean companies. There's bean companies all over the place in eastern Colorado and western Kansas and western Nebraska. So there's tons of markets on some of these things that you can drill them with the air seeder you got, you can harvest them with the combine you got. You don't need anything special. But our black-eyed peas, we've seen carryover nitrogen after black-eyed peas over 200 pounds. Usually we see a good 60 to 80 pound bump in nitrogen, carryover nitrogen after black eyes. And they handle drought, and they have a pretty good market on them. It's a really good one. But anyhow, so I did this sugar treatment out in my pinto beans, and of course they died. So I called the agronomist and I'm like, hey, will you do me a favor? I said, just go double check we don't have anything out there to harvest. And I said, while you're at it, there's those flags at the end of the field? He's like, yeah. Well, go do a population count between the different sets of flags and tell me what you find. He goes, well, the best population was in that last set of flags. He goes, what'd you do there? I said, that's 10 pounds of sugar per acre. What is sugar? Chemical composition of sugar, standard table sugar, is C6H12O6. It's 6 atoms of carbon with 6 molecules of water. So when you put sugar in the ground, you're putting carbon and water in the ground. I had a better population. Well, I put some water in the ground in a very arid climate, and it made a difference. So when it comes to seed treatments, you gotta be open-minded. And there's a bunch of crap out there, don't get me wrong, but it's worth at least getting a sample and doing stuff in your garden or small plot. I don't do that, but I recommend it for other people, that way they don't yell at me. So this is my corn this year. Most of the time you don't get your corn in a tote, and it comes out of the tote yellow. It was weird loading the drill because that corn seed should be pink, because that's the color of seed treatment. So this is about V2. On the left-hand side is treated seed. On the right-hand side is untreated. Little difference. And you got to remember, you're developing that root system from the day it goes in the ground. So if you're stunting that root system, you have stunted the root system for the entire year. You just didn't stun it for a day. And so the most important thing, the most important piece of equipment that you have in your farm is your seeding equipment. Because if you don't get things off to a good start, you're never going to have a good finish. So that's why I don't have a planter, and I dump all my money in my air seeder, because I have a really sweet piece of equipment. So that, yeah, straight out of the gate, there's a difference. Left is treated, right is untreated. Seeing a lot more rhizosheath, and this is bone dry soil that these things are coming out of. And we're getting rhizosheath in bone dry soil, an untreated seed. Is there a difference? Do we need that seed treatment? Now here's the one that just really got me. I called up my seed guy and I'm like, hey Jim, I'm sending you some pictures. And he goes, what? And I said, well, the first one is treated seed, the second one's untreated. And he goes, oh yeah, you always see the leaf striping because it goes through a little, you know, like zinc deficiency for a little bit. You know, it's just standard in the growing season. And everybody's seen it in their cornfields. The funny thing is the untreated seed didn't have that problem. It's because we didn't kill off the microbes that'll transport that and provide it to the root system. So, do we need seed treatment? Now, if I was in the middle of Iowa, would I want seed treatment? Yeah, because we got really heavy, wet clay soils. But would I play around and try some different things? I'll still do that. So this is my miscellaneous, etc., because I got so many different things going on, and I can talk for hours. I used to sell wind turbines, small scale for farms, and a guy bought one over by Holyoke, and one of his neighbors asked him, he said, Paul, what are you going to do when the wind doesn't blow? Paul looks at him and goes, well, first of all, we're in Northeast Colorado, so that's not very likely. But all else fails, I'll just have Roy come talk to it. So this picture here, you obviously can see the green plants. That's Dutch white clover. That was taken a year ago. At that point, those plants were 34 months old. And I had hit them with Roundup, I had hit them with glyphosate, or Gramoxone, I had hit them with 2,4-D, I had hit them with Banville. Clover is related to alfalfa, and if you've never experienced it, once you get it established, if you want to kill it, you've got to be really intentional on killing it. But it just hangs out there, and Dutch white is great because as long as it's below the canopy, as long as it's 45% shaded or more, it goes dormant during the growing season. But at harvest, you remove that canopy, boy, it perks right up, and I have clover that was blooming in September and October. You know, Jay talked about having a cover that you plant the same time you plant your seed. Well, how about a cover you never even have to plant once you get it established? It didn't show up this year in the drought. I'm really hoping that it didn't have enough moisture to come out of dormancy and it's just waiting, because that would be awesome. Because then I'd have living root for 5 years in Northeast Colorado. Dutch white clover also will fix 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So what does that do? That totally changes what we're looking at. Do I still put out 10 pounds of nitrogen? Yeah, because that's what the experts say, and she's been right on so many other things. I'm going to go with this one on. You know, I might shut it off every now and then just to see if the agronomist can see where I turned it off. We do intercropping and companion cropping. We intercrop chickpeas and flax. Chickpeas have a really bad problem with a disease called ascochyta. It's a blight that'll move in, and if you don't treat it within a couple of days of finding it, it will take a field and essentially zero it out in less than a week. I mean, the stuff is aggressive. Most chickpea producers, when they find it, they start spraying fungicides, and they will spray fungicides every 2 weeks until the end of the growing season. So they'll have $125 an acre in fungicides per, every year. You put flax in there, ascochyta just didn't grow. Nobody knows why. There's all kinds of theories. I don't care why, it works. So I save $125 an acre, and right now flax is running about 30 bucks a bushel. It doesn't, there's been a bunch of research on it. You go look it up on the internet. They've done tons of stuff in Canada on it. It doesn't have an impact in the yield of the chickpeas, and it actually, in most cases, increases the yield of the chickpeas and the quality. So I love flax. Flax is the highest connection with the mycorrhiza fungal of any crop you can raise. So, buckwheat and anything we raise buckwheat loves to volunteer. It does a really good job at it. The great part is it's easy to control if you want to. I usually follow my buckwheat with sunflowers and just let that volunteer come out there, because the sunflowers are going to outgrow it. Sunflowers outgrow Palmer amaranth. So, they're not going to affect yield. But buckwheat, it feeds the lithiotroph bacterial family in the soil. Lithiotroph, Latin, is literally rock eater. It takes the phosphorus that's in your soil that's not accessible by plants and converts it into a form that is accessible by plants. It also does the same thing for manganese, and people are like, manganese, whatever. Manganese is in the center of the molecule for photosynthesis and in the center of the molecule for respiration, transpiration of changing the stomas on the leaves. So crops following buckwheat are actually more drought tolerant. And we've done tests. We've had test strips of other crops in the middle of the buckwheat field, and you see it 3 years later because it has that effect. So buckwheat and anything. Alternative weed control, sometimes we create our own issues. There's a great book out there called When Weeds Talk. Now, I'm not going to swear by it, but it at least challenges your thinking of, is there a reason that weed's growing? We had 9 inches of rain in 7 hours 2 years ago. Last year, we had Palmer amaranth show up in fields that never had Palmer amaranth. And it's like, wow, that's really weird. And it's like, but that seed's everywhere. I mean, the seed that germinates for a reason. And it's because Mother Nature's trying to fix a problem. So I went and looked it up in that book. Palmer amaranth, you got too much nitrogen. Well, all the water ran in off the neighbor's field. And you can see exactly where the water ran because that's where all the high levels of nitrogen are. So sometimes we're creating our own problems, and we got to step back and stop looking at yield and start looking at profit. And that's one of the places to look at it. And of course, electro-weeding, I mean, it's just a sweet piece of equipment. So these are the root balls of the dead corn. Treated on the left, untreated on the right. And those are just 3. I just randomly walked out there and pulled up some plants. So it's, for me, that was the biggest. drought years suck, but they are the biggest opportunity for you to learn of any year. And so this is the year you can learn, and when it starts raining again, you apply those lessons and you just bump that top end that much more. So there's my contact information. I'll be around today, tomorrow. Give me a call. We do farm tours. If you go to our website, we have an online store where you can get our products. We're the only commercial producer of buckwheat and honey in Colorado, so all that's on there. It's kind of cool. So, any questions?